satisfied? Not with just right now. I mean, with your life, your whole life. You feeling pretty satisfied with things? Well, I want to find out today. Today, I want to conduct a couple of surveys. And the first one is a public survey because I really want to know kind of how many of us would answer yes to sort of degrees of satisfaction in our life. The second survey is more private, and I'm not going to ask you for answers. But in this first one, I need you to be honest and raise your hands. I need you to be honest, not only so that I can see, but so that we can look around and get a sense of how we are as a community in terms of our satisfaction. And I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and they are in descending order of satisfaction. The first one being, are you extremely satisfied with your life? Second, reasonably. Third, if there are some things you would change. So I need to be honest. Now, I'm not going to ask you to come down here and say anything, so you can raise your hand, and I'm not going to call on you. I'm not going to highlight you. But my suspicion is, in the first service, we had 5 people that affirmed this first question. So I'm not expecting there will be too many here, but this first question, would you agree, would you say yes, and you raise your hands if you would say yes, that you are totally and completely satisfied with everything in my life? How many of you would say that right now? I got a few. I got a dozen maybe, and one of you is under 8. You're the only one telling the truth in this room right now. So, no, that's good. Everybody get a sense? It's a small percentage. Now, the second question, I believe most of the people in the first service said yes to. I think this one's easy to say yes to. Let me see. How many of you would say, I am reasonably satisfied with my life? How many of you would agree with that? Okay, look around. That's a clear percentage. 80, 90%, would you guess? Now, this third question is similar, but it's a little more revealing, and my suspicion is there'll be a few less people that agree to this. And if you agree to the last one, you can agree to this one. I just want to kind of gauge the difference. The third question is there one thing in your life that if you changed it, you would say, my life would be better? Is there at least one thing in your life? See, not as many as before, but still a good percentage of people would say, if I could change one thing about my life, I would. Now I want to ask you a very private question. Actually, 5 private questions. And this is, don't raise your hands. In fact, I need you to wear your poker faces. You certainly don't want the person sitting next to you to know what you're answering this question. And this is a series of questions, and I need you to keep score of them. I need you to rank yourself on a scale of 5 to 1. 5 points, meaning I would change this thing about my life immediately. Before I left the church today, I wish this thing would change. That would be 5 points. If you wish it would change sort of by the end of the day, you give it a little more time, that's 4 points. If you could get around to it at some point in the near future, that's 3 points. 2 points would be maybe, possibly, eventually, that's 2 points. And if it's something that you would never want to change, ever, give yourself 1 point. You understand? I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and I want you to keep the total to yourself. Now, I need you to be poker faced, so sit. I can tell you're either bored or doing really well right now. So just keep doing what you're doing. And on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 meaning I would change it immediately, 1 meaning I would never change it, would you say that my life would be better if my marriage changed? If my marriage changed. If you're sitting here today and you're sitting with your spouse and you're thinking 5, don't move. If you're thinking 1, you could probably go, that's 1. All right? Second question. My life would be better if my, what's the second one? Finances? Family changed. If my family changed. You're thinking about not picking up your children from the nursery. That's a 5. If you're saying, I wish my kids were the age they were right now, I wish things in my family would never change, that's a 1. Keep track of the scores. Right, 3rd, my life would be better if my finances changed. Your financial situation, your debts, your income stream, your ability to earn opportunities. Would you say, I need that to change right away? Or would you say, man, I'm totally content? Score it again. You should have 3 scores in your head. 4th question. My life would be better if my job changed. Job or career, either one. I mean, it may be a specific working environment that you may want to change. Now, change can mean end. Change can mean just get better. How urgent is your sense, or do you have any sense that you would want to be doing something different professionally in your job or your career? And the last question should be keeping this total in your head. My life would be better if my health changed. Could you be healthier, lose weight, more fit, less joint pain, less migraines, just younger? So how would you score that in terms of the urgent need to change? See, I want to spend the next few weeks talking about our quest for satisfaction, about the relentless sense that I get that we live in a very restless world. That we not only embrace change, but we seek it. We need it. We're constantly looking for something better, something more. We're pursuing. And I want us to wrestle with the idea, is it possible, living in a restless world, to actually be satisfied, to actually be happy? And I want to talk about one particular aspect of satisfaction. It's called contentment. Contentment is not easy to attain, but it is easy to attack. It is easy to pursue, but it's difficult to attain. And so today I want to begin with defining what contentment is by sharing with you the secret of the Mamuamai. The secret of the Mamuamai and the paradox of playing with house money. But before we talk about what contentment means and the secret of the Mamuamai, would you pray with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your words spoken by your servant and anointed by your Spirit to encourage us and to remind us of our hope and our strength. Pray that for myself and for my family and for all of us here. For I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. I have become increasingly convinced the longer I've studied the Bible, and I've studied the Bible for 40 years with some intensity, I'm becoming convinced that the most neurotic person in the Bible, the most obsessive workaholic in the entire Bible, was the person we know of as the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul spent the better part of his entire adult life on the move. He was a man who was relentlessly restless. He spent his life traveling on journeys, planting churches. Over the course of his life, he lived as an activist, as a spiritual entrepreneur, and as a fugitive for over 30 years. Over the course of his life, he started 20 different churches. That would be like, over the course of your lifetime, starting 20 separate small businesses. The Apostle Paul started at least 20 churches. He wrote countless letters to those churches and the people he met in those churches. 13 of those letters are considered to be so divinely inspired that they make up almost half of what we consider the entire New Testament, the writings of the Apostle Paul. He spent his life in constant motion. He was an obsessive workaholic, driven by his ideals and his mission and his vision. In the spring of 50 AD, actually into the late summer of 50 AD, the Apostle Paul was on what we call his second missionary journey. He had spent much of the summer traveling through the area of central Turkey, and in July of 50 AD, he was on the northwestern coast of Turkey in a city called Troas. And while he was there, God spoke directly to Paul and told him to press into the heart of the Roman Empire, into the established Greek culture in the region of Macedonia. The largest city in the region of Macedonia was an ancient Greek city called Philippi. And in August of 50 AD, the Apostle Paul and his entourage, which included Luke, who was writing the book of Acts at the time, his disciple Timothy, and his preaching partner Silas, traveled to the city of Philippi, where no one had ever heard of who Jesus was before. They began to preach, and it so antagonized the local authorities that Paul and Silas were arrested, and they were beaten, and they were thrown into prison. There's a story in the book of Acts that tells us that as Paul and Silas were sitting in their jail cells, and this is the only way you could get Paul to slow down, was literally by chaining him to a wall. They were chained in their prison cell singing hymns. When there was a giant earthquake and an angel of God came and busted the prison wide open, removed their handcuffs, and Paul and Silas didn't leave, because the jailer pled with them to stay, because he knew if they escaped, he would be executed. And that Philippian jailer became one of the first and most significant converts of the young church in Philippi. It was 6 years later, in the late summer, early fall, that the Apostle Paul and his entourage returned to Philippi in 56 AD. They spent 6 months there at this young church that had been established 6 years earlier. It was during that time that the Philippian church, even though they weren't wealthy at all, raised enough money to fund Paul's ongoing missions efforts and shared it generously with them. It was 6 years after this, 12 years after his first visit to Philippi, that Paul was in prison in Rome in 62 AD, when the Philippian church, as meager as their resources were, took another special offering and sent it to Paul to share their blessings with him. Upon the reception of this generosity, the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to the church in Philippi, which has been preserved for us in our Bibles as the book of Philippians. And it's in this letter to the church at Philippi that the obsessive workaholic, the relentlessly restless Apostle Paul, says something amazing. And what we have is Philippians chapter 4, verse 11, he says, I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live with almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether my stomach is full or empty, whether I have plenty or I have little. How is it possible that this relentlessly restless man says, I have learned what it means to be content? There's nothing in him. There's nothing in us that would make us naturally find this thing called contentment. It's totally unnatural, because you see, we are people. As a species, as human beings, we are fashioned to pursue. We are fashioned to grow. We are fashioned for more. It doesn't matter whether you're an evolutionary biologist like Carl Sagan, who describes the trajectory of human existence as the pursuit of achievement and creativity, that the survival of our species is based on our restlessness. It is based on our human nature to achieve and to acquire and to accumulate and to accomplish. It's how we survive as a species. So whether you ascribe it to evolutionary biology in our human DNA, or whether you're like C.S. Lewis, and you ascribe that desire for more to the imprint of God, the imago Dei, the image of God on us, that Lewis implies is sort of the internal mechanism that reminds us that we are made for better days, we are made for better things. Whether you think it is our evolutionary DNA or our spiritual DNA, we are not naturally inclined to be content. None of us are. We live in an uphill trajectory, and not only are we hardwired for that restlessness, we live in a culture that actually encourages it. It's built on it. We are consumer-driven. We are people who live to buy and to achieve and to accomplish. In fact, we look at one another and value each other. We measure our significance by what we are able to accomplish and acquire and achieve. Each of us measures our significance as human beings based on that perpetual shark-like moving forward. We cling to the mantra that if some is good, more has got to be better. And we think like a shark, and if we're not moving forward, the trajectory of our life has got to be characterized by growth. We consider a person disabled if they are unable to move forward, if they are unable to grow. I don't know a single person who, as they age, wants to become useless, wants to simply be a burden to those around them. All of us want to die with our boots on. All of us want to be making a difference and a contribution with our lives. It is our nature. It is how we are fashioned. So how is it possible for the Apostle Paul, or for any of us, to learn what contentment is? Paul says it's a secret. In verse 12 of Philippians chapter 4, he says, I have learned the secret. And the word that he uses there is memuomai. It's an unusual word in the Greek language. The normal word for mystery or for a secret in the Greek language is mysterion. It sounds like mystery. But memuo or memuomai that he uses here is what's called a hapax legomena. It only appears one time in the entire Greek New Testament, and it's here. And it's a loan word from ancient Greek mythology, and it means to be initiated into the mystery. Paul is saying that I have discovered the mystery of the world that we live in. I have learned the secret knowledge. I have looked over my life, and I haven't answered the questions of why good things happen to bad people, or why idiots get rich, or why stupid people get lucky, or why good people suffer. I haven't answered the mystery of the world that I live in, but I've come to terms with it. I have been initiated into the secret knowledge. I have learned it. And I think what Paul is getting at is I have come to terms with the chaos and the uncertainty of the world that we live in. That I've seen behind the curtain. How did he do that? It says in verse 11 that I learned to be content. The word there for learned is emathion. And it's of all the Greek words for knowledge, it's knowledge that comes by experience. It is knowledge that is gained because I have been there and done that. And it just so happens that the verb that Paul uses for I have learned is in a very rare case. It's actually the tense of the verb is what's called second aorist. And the aorist is a resultant aorist, which means as a result of my life, as a result of my experiences, I have learned about the mystery. I have learned about the highs and the lows. I have learned about the wins and the losses. I've learned about the pain and the pleasure and the burdens and the blessing through the experience of my life. I don't know about you, but when you get old enough like me to wear out your AARP card, you learn a few things. And you realize that what goes around comes around, and that life has ebbs and flows, and most of it you can't change. You didn't ask for it, you didn't cause it, and you don't spend your time anymore looking for excuses or looking for people to blame. You learn from the experience of life that there's a rhythm, that there's a flow. And you learn to look at it and say, okay, I understand that this is good and this is bad. And some of it I cannot change. I can't do anything about it. And that's okay. Because as you learn about the mystery, you develop, Paul says, contentment. The word that he uses there is autarkes. It literally means self-sufficiency. I think what he's getting at is the idea that I'm no longer victimized by my situation. I'm no longer victimized by my circumstances. I'm no longer stuck in the phonelies. If only this had happened, or if only that had happened. I'm no longer worried about assigning blame or making excuses. I can look clear-eyed at life and say, it is what it is. And I understand it. And what contentment means is not some passive, gooey, floating in a sensory deprivation chamber of mellow. What it means is to have the courage and the strength to press into life honestly and truthfully. This is adult 101. This is not stuff for the faint of heart. That's why it takes most of our life to acquire it. That's why it's increasingly difficult to do when you're in your 20s and your 30s and you're still acquiring and climbing and aspiring and you're filled with idealism. But as you journey through life, you begin to acquire enough experience and enough wisdom to realize that there's a rhythm to it. And the point is to not give up. Because what I think contentment means is that you're stronger than you realize. That the things that you have been through, the things that you are facing, the things that have yet to come will not defeat you. Because you're stronger than you realize. And I think this is what Paul has learned. This is the secret. This is the mystery. This is the memumai. But unless you think that it's just this self-confident resolve, this internal strength, there's Philippians 4, verse 13. Perhaps you've seen it on the headbands of athletes, 4:13. Perhaps you've seen it on Steph Curry's sneakers in the NBA playoffs, where he writes the first few words of Philippians 4:13. Perhaps you've seen it on Tim Tebow's socks. Because Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things. I can do everything through Christ who strengthens me. What Paul has realized in the surfacing of the experience of life and the ebb and flow of the blessings and the burdens and the pain and the pleasure is that he cannot lose. He's playing with house money. There's a story that Jesus tells, and it's in Matthew chapter 25, and I think most of us know it. It's called the parable of the talents. It's really a story about a man, a wealthy man, who, when he is going away on a trip, entrusts 3 of his servants with portions of his wealth. Sometimes it's described as talents, sometimes it's described as bags of gold, sometimes it's described as portions of his estate. But it says that before he leaves, he entrusts one of his servants with 5 bags of gold, or 5 talents, and one with 2, and one with 1, each according to their ability. And he leaves them to manage those funds. Eventually he returns, and it turns out that the one who had been given 5 measures of the rich man's wealth had doubled that in investment. And when the rich man returns, he says, look, master, I've taken the 5 bags of gold, or the 5 talents you gave me, and I made them 10. And the master looks at him and he says, well done, my good and faithful servant. The man who had 2 talents did the same thing. He doubled his and presented 4. But the man who had 1 talent buried it in the ground because he was afraid. He was afraid of losing it. And so when the master returned, he dug it up, and I like to imagine he said, look, I didn't lose it. It's still here. And as Jesus tells the story, he portrays the disappointment of the master. And he says that you are a worthless servant. What have you done? You haven't done anything with what I've given you. You couldn't lose it, but you did nothing with it. And so now you present it to me, and the response that Jesus portrays in that story is really harsh. He says, take the talent that this man dug up and hid in the ground and give it to the man who has 10, and then take this worthless servant and throw him out into the utter darkness where there's weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Just get him out of my sight. And the story is about playing with house money. The story is about us. The story is about contentment. Because God has given us the resources to make the world a better place. God has given us the promise that you cannot fail. Now, you will have failure, and we will have loss, and we will have struggles. But in the end, we'll not go broke. We cannot lose. If I were to tell you that whatever you put your mind to, you could not lose. It may not be easy, but you will succeed. And if you succeed, you get to keep all of the profits of your success. You cannot lose, and you get to keep all of the blessings. Would that change how you looked at your life? Would that change how you experienced your resources? Paul knew it had changed the Philippians. Because the verse that nobody really talks about is Philippians 4:14. Where after he says in verse 13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, he says, even so, you Philippians, well done, my good and faithful servants. Because what did you do? You knew you couldn't lose. You knew you had plenty. Because the hallmark of contentment is generosity. Because I know I have enough. I know I will be fine. I know I have a sufficient amount, so I can give what I have to you. And that generosity was what Paul was celebrating from the Philippians, because it is the manifestation of true contentment. The secret of Imumai, the secret of what it means to be content, is to understand how strong we really are. That we have resources that we do not even realize. And that in the ebb and flow and the darkness and light and the justice and injustice of life, we're going to be okay. Because you're stronger than you know. Over the last week, I took a bunch of online surveys to find out if I was satisfied. Took a bunch, and you know what I found? I found that I'm apparently a very satisfied human being. In fact, there was one survey that said I was among the happiest people on earth. I went, you suck, man. So you know what I did? I took a couple of the tests kind of from the mindset of like a serial killer, an angry serial killer, and it still said, you seem to be highly satisfied. So how'd you do on our little quiz? The one you were keeping score of in your head. The one about marriage and family and finances and your job and your health. How'd you do? I would imagine, unfortunately, that there may be a few people here, hopefully not many, who scored a 5. Who said, I want nothing to change. Because if you're here and you scored a 5 on that survey, don't leave. We want to take your DNA. We want to give it to Tony Robbins to hand out at his seminars. Either that or you need to move out of your parents' basement. It's time. But I would also imagine that there are some people here who closed in on 25, or 23, 24, 25, that much of their life, that could be better, could should be different. And I'm so glad you're here, because this is the journey we want to take together to help you find that satisfaction, that contentment, that strength you didn't know you have. My guess is, and after 2 services, the surveys seem to be bearing it out, that most of us are probably somewhere between 6 or 7 and 20 and 22. Welcome to the party. That's how life works. But I don't think we needed a survey, really, to tell us that finding satisfaction in life is hard. That our ambition and our desire and our longing for better or for more it's part of our life. And it's difficult to put in perspective. But when it all shakes out, I like to think that I didn't need to be told that finding contentment was hard. I needed to be reminded of this one thing, that I'm stronger than I realize. And my resources are greater than I know. And I think I'll be satisfied with that.